If you don't start acting like a bitch, you're going to become chronically ill. One of the most unsettling experiences as a woman is realizing that your body has been telling the truth long before you were able to. Maybe you've experienced it. The exhaustion that doesn't go away, the chronic pain, the autoimmune diagnosis, migraines, burnout, anxiety, the feeling that your body is screaming for something that you can't quite put into words. And for a long time, I thought these things were completely separate from the emotional life I was living. I thought that stress was stress, illness was illness, and childhood was childhood. The older I get, the harder it becomes to ignore the connection between what we carry emotionally and end up wearing physically. Before I go on, I want to be clear that not every trauma causes illness, and I'm not saying that autoimmune diseases are all in your head, and none of your pain conditions are a result of not thinking positively enough. What I am saying though is decades of research show that chronic stress, childhood adversity, emotional suppression, and nervous system dysregulation have profound effects on the body. And I think many of us oldest daughters know exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of us learned very early how to swallow our emotions, how to stay strong, carry other people's burdens, and eventually our bodies started carrying those burdens too. So today I want to talk about how the body keeps the score, emotional suppression, chronic illness, and why this conversation is impossible to separate from how girls were raised. And honestly, I want this to feel a bit more of a conversation between women that are finally starting to ask, what did it cost to be raised this way? Chapter 1. The body keeps the score. The body never forgets. One thing I wish people understood more is that children do not experience stress the same way adults do. Children experience stress through their bodies. When a child feels unsafe, their nervous system can't help but respond. When a child is constantly scanning for dangers, threats, and everybody else's emotional regulation, their nervous system responds. And when these experiences happen over and over again over a span of years, the body learns to adapt. Researchers studying adverse childhood experiences have found that childhood trauma and chronic stress are associated significantly with adverse health later on in life. And not because trauma magically creates diseases, but because the body was not designed to remain in survival mode indefinitely. And many think eldest daughters become experts in survival. Maybe you became the responsible one, the peacemaker, the therapist, the surrogate parent, the daughter who never asked for too much. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that your feelings can wait, that your needs are not important, that other people have it worse, and you just need to get through this. But emotions don't just disappear simply because they're inconvenient. Your body and nervous system still experience them. And eventually, for many women, that bill comes due. I think a lot of us are probably experienced with the concept of crying as a child and being told, I'll give you something to cry about. There's so many moments where I reflect on my childhood where I was experiencing stress, fear, whatever it might be, and being met with shut up, basically. That whatever I was experiencing actually was not that severe and did not warrant me crying or wanting reassurance. And so I learned very quickly to minimize my emotional needs and wants, because it was also very clear that the adults around me were not capable of meeting those needs. And I think this is a topic that we can dive into later, but I don't believe that my parents were capable of meeting my emotional needs because they weren't capable of meeting their own. When I was 8 years old, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, which was terrible and traumatic and a very hard journey for all of us as a family to go on. But through that, I learned that at 8 years old, with younger siblings, it was my job to step up in the role of my family and become the mother and the emotional provider and the surrogate parent. And I learned very quickly that I was not allowed to have emotions because what was going on around me was, and it was, significantly worse. This was a terrible thing that my mother went through. But this lingered on throughout the rest of my life, even after she had recovered from cancer and had returned back to her life. And I was still not allowed to have emotional needs because nothing that I could ever go through would ever be as bad as what that was. That experience, paired with the type of father that I had, all just created this perfect storm of emotional suppression. And I wasn't even aware that I was doing it. This was just like my desire and need to survive. And through that, I ended up becoming chronically ill. At the age of 13, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And then by the age of 19, that was upgraded to fibromyalgia because I felt like I was made of cement carrying everyone else's bullshit constantly and had no space for my own. I had such a rich internal world, but there was no space for it to ever be expressed because my role in the family was to be of service. How much can I provide? What can I serve? What can I do? And I didn't realize until adulthood that strength and emotional suppression were not the same thing. Chapter 2, when survival becomes chronic stress. It breaks my heart when women do not recognize stress because it is so normal in their lives. You become used to carrying everything and over-functioning while under so much pressure. Pushing through exhaustion is a daily ritual, and you are a pro at ignoring your body's signals. When you live in chronic stress like this, it stops feeling like something that your body is doing and more something that you are. And this is why you're known as the strong one, the independent one, the one that everyone can always rely on in the middle of a crisis. And while resilience is beautiful and a superpower, I also think that someone that is hyper-resilient is just someone that never had the option to fall apart. Because when your nervous system spends years scanning for danger, your body doesn't just simply forget. And the research shows that women with severe childhood trauma, stress, neglect, often have autoimmune diseases later on in life. And I think many women intuitively understand this. This is also historical. This is not just new research. This is historical. I think a lot of this has to do with the patriarchy and patriarchal burden of women always carrying everything emotionally. When I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia at 19 years old, it genuinely felt like a death sentence. I was living off painkillers just to function in everyday life, and then that ended up bleeding into forms of self-medication, which were really unhealthy coping mechanisms. But clearly, I was put in this situation in the first place because I had never been taught any kind of coping mechanisms. Forget healthy coping mechanisms. I was never taught any to begin with. That's why there was so much emotional suppression, which then turned into this feeling of cement, pain, aching, exhaustion in my body. And when you approach a doctor about this, oh my goodness, the forms of sexism, even in the medical industry, of this is just women's pain. Here's the pill. Have you tried the pill? Okay, well, how about an antidepressant? Oh, well, you're just a crazy woman. You live in pain. We have nothing that we can do for you, so cope, I guess. That's all I've ever been doing my entire life, and clearly it's not working anymore. I was really at a standstill in my life with feeling like I could not continue living like this. And it is such a journey and a path that all of us that are chronically ill must go on to find a life that works for us. Because the life that we were dropped into in childhood clearly is not one that was made for abundance, a soft life with regulation and healthy relation to self. And that is a journey that you have to go on yourself in adulthood to learn. But just because I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia at 19 does not mean I radically went on this healing journey. This took years and years. And just because my body was breaking down doesn't mean I stopped overfunctioning. Chapter 3, the emotions that never had a voice. One of the most misunderstood aspects of healing is grief. Because for many women, there are so many emotions that are taboo, like anger, rage, grief, resentment. We're taught to transform emotions into something that's a little bit more palatable. Turn anger into understanding, rage into empathy, disappointment into gratitude, and turn exhaustion into productivity. And eventually you stop expressing what you need and you start managing it, containing it, swallowing it. And not because you're weak or dramatic, but because somewhere along the way you learned that expressing your emotions was unsafe. And so many women spend our lives feeling disconnected from what we actually feel because we've become so focused on regulating what everybody else needs. I think for me, it was one of the most surprising things when I actually had one of the biggest aha moments about my childhood, my life, and the first emotion that presented itself was grief, and very quickly followed by rage, disgust, resentment, all of these big, yucky, and quite taboo emotions which I had never been able to feel before. Even through the abuse I experienced through my father, I met that with so much grace and empathy, excusing him for his behavior based on his childhood, his life, the fact that he was a man and probably unable to access support, therapy, community, the same way that women can, So much grace. But then when it turned to be about my family unit, my mother, my relation to the family, years, if not decades on, that's when I met it with all of these quote unquote taboo emotions. And that to me was so surprising and a journey in itself of navigating what it feels like to hold space for these emotions, which women typically aren't allowed to feel or express, and being able to express that freely in an environment where I was seen, validated, and supported. Chapter 4, why this is a women's issue. I think why this conversation matters so much is not because it is just a personal issue, but it is a cultural issue. Women are disproportionately, if not solely, expected to carry the emotional labor, to manage relationships, meet everybody's needs and expectations, anticipate problems and soothe conflict. And we rarely discuss what that takes, especially on mothers, daughters, and especially eldest daughters. Girls are often rewarded for self-sacrificing long before they realize what they're doing. And years later, society asks why so many women are ill, sick, and exhausted. Why are so many women burnt out, living with chronic illness? Why so many women struggle to rest? And why we're at the point now where so many women are refusing to participate in motherhood or being a wife. And while it looks like this is a cultural shift and this has appeared out of nowhere, maybe it's the result of social media or feminism or something like that, it truly is a cultural reset because forever women have carried the emotional burden and weight, and that's never been acknowledged before. I think on a smaller scale, it starts with how you relate to your family, but this is culturally reinforced. And I genuinely think so many women carry these conversations privately. So if this is something that resonates with you or you feel like you connect with, let me know in the comments. Let's talk about it. Chapter 5, the body keeps the score. Your body does not want to live in illness. It is designed to heal itself. And so when something is wrong, it is trying to communicate with us. It's trying to let us know about the fatigue, the burnout, that these are not character flaws, but rather this is a self-regulation flaw. Your body is trying to communicate with you that I cannot carry this alone and I cannot do this anymore. And again, this doesn't mean that every symptom has a psychological explanation, and it does not mean that illness is your fault. But I think I discovered that healing requires more than just diagnosing and treating a symptom. It requires listening, validation, expression, feeling grief and anger, and listening to needs that have been ignored for years. And for women that spent their life serving everybody else, this will feel revolutionary. About 18 months ago, I came to the realization that the role I played in my family was not how it seemed my entire life. I felt like I had been hoodwinked or mystified about who I actually was and what my role in life was, because always it was just to be as productive and useful as I possibly can. And when I came to this realization, I started to feel all of those taboo feelings that I mentioned earlier. And instead of jumping straight into therapy, to talk about it, intellectualize it, package it in a neater, nicer way, I took a year and a half to actually feel these emotions, feel the grief, the anger, the resentment, mourn the childhood that I never got to have, mourn all of the versions of me that could have existed if I was actually supported, nurtured, cared for, listened to. And that to me has been incredible because now I have started going back to therapy. I am able to actually navigate therapy in a way where I'm not just setting off mines and like bombs as I go and then spending the entire session just in turmoil. I've already come to peace and terms with what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing. And in regards to healing my fibromyalgia, I do not experience any of these symptoms anymore. It is because I am with an incredible partner who has just given me the time, space, and energy to be a mess, to fall apart, to be angry, to be bitter, and not towards him, but in my own internal world, and just validate that I'm allowed to feel this way. I'm allowed to set these boundaries. I'm allowed to be upset. I'm allowed to not speak. I'm allowed to be a bitch. And not just in a way of existing, but a way of processing, feeling the emotion to its fullest extent and releasing it from my body. I initially thought that healing meant you would become stronger. And in reality, it meant that I just became more honest with myself. Chapter 6, redefining what strength actually means. One of the biggest wake-up calls in my healing journey is realizing that strength does not mean endurance. It's not about carrying everything. It's definitely not about suffering silently. Real strength looks like knowing when I need to rest and enforcing that, setting boundaries and enforcing them, giving myself space and grace to feel my actual emotions, and kind of just parenting myself in the way that I wish I was initially parented, in the way that would have changed my life if my parents had raised me like that. For so many of us, we have spent our lives proving just how much we can survive on how little. And maybe the next chapter isn't about surviving, but it's actually about living. If you've spent years carrying grief, stress, emotions that had nowhere to go, I want you to hear this. Your body is not betraying you. Your exhaustion is not weakness. Your symptoms are not moral failures. And your worth has never been determined by how much suffering you can endure. To every eldest daughter, I see you. And I think there is something incredibly brave about admitting what carrying all of this actually costs you. And not because you want to stay stuck in the pain, but because healing starts with honesty. So if this resonated with you, I would genuinely love for you to drop a comment below. What did your body try and tell you before you were ready to listen? What role did you play growing up? And what are you learning now? And if you'd like more conversations like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.